There is someone you have spent your entire life trying to understand. You know their memories, their fears, their private thoughts, and the things they would never admit to anyone else. That person is you. But here's the first strange problem. Neuroscience has never discovered one single location inside the brain where the permanent you appears to live. Different parts of the brain contribute to memory, emotion, decision-making, body awareness, and personality. Your sense of being one person may be created by all these systems working together. In other words, the self may feel like one thing without actually being one thing. Consider your own body. Most people assume that the body is the most undeniable part of identity, but in an experiment known as the rubber hand illusion, a person's real hand is hidden while a visible rubber hand is touched at the same time. After a short period, many participants begin to feel as though the rubber hand belongs to them. Some even react with fear when it is threatened. Your brain can temporarily claim a piece of rubber as part of you. If your sense of bodily ownership can be reassigned that easily, then even the physical boundary of the self may be less permanent than it feels. Your personality can be just as difficult to locate. You may be confident around one person and nervous around another. You may become more childish around your family, more serious at work, and more expressive with your closest friends. Then, when you're completely alone, another version appears. Which one is the real you? Psychological research suggests that social situations can change how personality is expressed. Different environments activate different emotional patterns, expectations, and learned behaviors. You're not necessarily pretending. The mind that appears in a safe room may genuinely behave differently from the mind that feels watched, judged, or threatened. Maybe you are not one personality performing everywhere. Maybe you're a range of possible selves, and each environment decides which one is given permission to appear. We still talk as though an original version must be hidden underneath them all. We say, I need to find myself. We say, that was not the real me. We tell certain people, I can finally be myself around you. But these phrases contain an assumption. They assume there is a finished, authentic person buried underneath social pressure and fear. What if there is no original edition of you waiting to be uncovered? What if every version has been shaped by what happened before it? Think about the person you were 10 years ago. That person may have believed things you now reject. They may have loved people you no longer speak to, feared problems you no longer remember, and imagined a future that never arrived. You know that person was you, but they may no longer feel completely like you. Research on the future self reveals something equally strange. When people feel disconnected from the person they will become years from now, the brain can represent that future person more like a stranger than the present self. The person whose life you are building may not always feel like you yet. This can influence whether you save money, protect your health, or sacrifice comfort today for something that will only benefit you later. Your past self can feel like someone you remember. Your future self can feel like someone you have not met. And your present self exists briefly between them. Personality also changes more than most people realize. Long-term studies show that personality traits can continue changing throughout adulthood. On average, people often develop greater self-control, warmth, confidence, and emotional stability as they move through early and middle adulthood. Not everyone changes in the same way, but personality is not frozen when childhood ends. Words like shy, lazy, anxious, emotional, or independent may describe a pattern. They do not necessarily describe a permanent identity. Sometimes the traits we defend as our personality began as adaptations. A child who is repeatedly embarrassed may learn to stay quiet. A child who is punished for mistakes may become a perfectionist. A child who cannot rely on anyone may become fiercely independent. Years later, the original situation may be gone, but the behavior remains. The person no longer says, I learned to be this way. They say, this is simply who I am. A survival response can eventually become a personality description. Then the personality description becomes a rule, and the rule begins controlling situations that have nothing to do with the danger that created it. You may spend years protecting yourself from something that is no longer happening. But personality is only one part of identity. The other major part is memory. You feel like the same person who existed years ago because your memories create a bridge between that person and you. They connect separate days into one continuous life. But memory is not a recording stored untouched inside the brain. Autobiographical memory is reconstructive. Your current emotions can influence which parts of the past become available and how those moments feel when remembered. You do not simply open an old file. Your brain rebuilds the experience. This means the memory you recall today may not feel exactly like the memory you recalled 5 years ago. The event stayed in the past, but its meaning continued changing with you. Researchers have even shown that some people can develop detailed memories for plausible autobiographical events that never happened. They may remember images, emotions, locations, or reactions connected to something that was suggested to them. The memory can feel real because the brain does not attach a warning label to every reconstructed detail. Certainty is not proof that a memory is accurate, and if your identity is partly built from memory, then the person you believe yourself to be may be based on evidence that has been shortened, reorganized, reinterpreted, or occasionally mistaken. The mind does something else that strengthens identity information. Connected to the self is often remembered better than unrelated information. Psychologists call this the self-reference effect. When something feels connected to me, the brain gives it special importance. This can create a loop. You believe you're a certain kind of person, so you notice experiences that support that identity. You remember those experiences more easily, and they convince you that the identity was correct. A person who believes they are always rejected may remember every rejection while overlooking the moments when someone tried to become close. The story selects the evidence, and the evidence strengthens the story. Then there is the voice inside your mind. It explains what you did, why you did it, what you believe, and what kind of person you are. Because the voice sounds like you, it is easy to assume that it understands everything happening inside you, but experiments involving choice blindness reveal something unsettling. Researchers have secretly changed the outcome of a person's decision and then asked them to explain it. Some participants failed to notice the switch and confidently defended a choice they had never actually made. The mind can produce a sincere explanation for a decision that was not even its own. This suggests that the inner narrator is not always the commander giving orders. Sometimes it is the press secretary arriving afterward to explain what already happened. You may feel an emotion first, take an action second, and create a reasonable story third. The story is not necessarily a lie, it is the brain attempting to make itself understandable. The mind prefers a flawed explanation over no explanation because a consistent character is easier to live with than a collection of unexplained reactions. When your behavior contradicts your identity, the narrator often repairs the story. A person who believes they are kind may decide that someone deserved their cruelty. A person who believes they are confident may call an avoided challenge pointless. A person who believes they are independent may hide how desperately they want approval. The self is often protected by editing the explanation rather than changing the identity. This is why people can contain enormous contradictions without feeling like different individuals. You can be generous and selfish, you can be confident and insecure, you can be brave in one situation and terrified in another. Perhaps contradiction does not mean one of those versions is fake. Perhaps contradiction is what happens when a complicated mind is compressed into a simple story. There is even a collection of connected brain regions strongly involved when you think about yourself. It is commonly called the default mode network. Parts of this network become active during autobiographical memory, self-reflection, imagining the future, understanding other people, and building internal narratives. The brain uses overlapping systems to remember who you were and imagine who you might become. Your identity may partly be a simulation connecting a remembered person to an imagined one. This can explain why severe disruption to autobiographical memory can also disrupt a person's sense of identity. Memory does more than preserve information. It allows you to experience your life as belonging to one continuous individual. When that continuity weakens, the self can become difficult to organize. You do not only remember your life in a psychological sense, your remembered life helps create the person doing the remembering. So what does all of this mean? There are several possibilities. One possibility is that a true self exists underneath fear, conditioning, and social pressure. Your task is to remove what was imposed on you and reveal the person who was always there. Another possibility is that you contain multiple real selves. The person at work is real. The person with family is real. The person who appears under pressure is also real. No single version needs to be declared the original. The final possibility is more unsettling. Maybe the self is not an object at all. Maybe it is a process. A flame looks like one stable thing, even though the material producing it is constantly changing. A river keeps the same name while different water passes through it every second. Perhaps you're similar. There's continuity, but not complete permanence. There is a recognizable pattern, but the contents of that pattern are always moving. At first, this can sound frightening. If there is no fixed self, does that mean you're not real? Not necessarily. A song is real, even though it only exists while it is being played. A story is real, even though every sentence disappears into the next. Something does not need to remain unchanged to be real. In fact, the absence of a permanently fixed identity may be one of the most hopeful things about being human. It means you are not sentenced to remain the person your childhood created. You're not required to keep proving your worst experience is correct. A belief such as, I am weak, I am unlovable, or I always fail, may feel like self-knowledge. But it may only be an old conclusion formed by a previous version of you using the evidence available at the time. Changing that conclusion can feel strangely dishonest. A shy person may feel fake when speaking confidently. A people pleaser may feel cruel when setting a boundary. A person who connects worth with productivity may feel guilty while resting. The old identity protests because the new behavior feels unfamiliar, but unfamiliar does not mean false. Every version of you was unfamiliar before it became automatic. Maybe you will never discover one final person hidden underneath everything. Maybe there will never be a moment when every contradiction disappears and you understand yourself completely, but perhaps finding one permanent answer was never the purpose. The better question may not be, who am I beneath everything? It may be, what am I repeatedly choosing to become? You cannot choose every thought that enters your mind. You cannot control every emotion, erase every memory, or undo everything that shaped you, but you can examine the story those experiences created. You can notice which identities still serve you and which ones belong to situations that no longer exist. Your true self may not be the part of you that never changes. It may be the values you return to after you lose your direction. It may be the person you attempt to become when nobody is forcing you to perform. It may be found less in what you automatically feel and more in what you consciously choose to do with those feelings. You are not one finished person. You are not only the child you were, the mistakes you made, or the personality other people expect to see. You are a changing mind carrying an unfinished story. And perhaps the most authentic thing about you is not what has remained the same. Perhaps it is your ability to decide what happens in the next chapter.